What is going on, friends? Welcome into another live stream here on Sports from the Couch, the Sports Cubicle. I'm your host, Mike Mercado. I appreciate you making us a little part of your night here on this Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. We're going to give everybody just a second to join us, and we're going to have some fun tonight. We are going to live here kind of go through the fallout of the Ben Johnson hiring as the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. It's been a few days since the news broke. We've had a press conference, and the new head coach has already done the news cycle, has gone to all the major players in the media outlets in the football and sports world. And I wanted to put a bow on this week. And there was a lot of excitement, rightfully so. There is a lot of questions now. And within those questions are concerns and some optimism. So we wanted to tackle some of those things here tonight on this live stream. We're going to go for maybe about 25, 30 minutes. Please leave a comment down below if you're watching us live, and we will get to them at the very end of the show. We'll take some time to break down what you guys are seeing and believing and vibing on. And it's going to be a really fun stream for the next couple of minutes as we break down some of the news since Ben Johnson has been hired as the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. Speaking of Chicago Bears, you can also find me at the Bear Era podcast, along with EJ Snyder from Bootleg Football and Kieran Hall from the Irish Bears Network, the Irish Bears Show. The three of us have some amazing guests on week in and week out throughout the entire Bears season. And during big moments of the Bears offseason, you can find us on YouTube at Bear Era Pod or at the Blue Wire Podcast Network at Bear Era Podcast. So check us out there if you want even more and informative Bears content. But thank you again for joining us here tonight on the YouTube channel. If you're new to us, welcome to the party. Subscribe to us here on YouTube at the Sports Cubicle. If you're here in Chicago, you could catch the show live. Well, the segment's live on Chicago radio on WCPT 820 AM and WSBC 1240 AM right here in Chicago, Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Otherwise, we put our segments and our interviews, our conversations, and live streams right here on the YouTube channel or wherever you get your favorite podcast at Sports from the Couch. So I wanted to start off with some news that broke before we actually got on here, and it was a little bit earlier on today that there are some changes that are going to occur, not only with the new head coach and obviously people he's going to bring in, but some names are going to be gone. And that's kind of the sad truth of when transitions like this happen. It's something that we never root for, at least personally, and we'll get to in a second, these names. You have to keep people accountable when you're doing a show like this and when you're responsible to talking with your community and you're discussing your favorite sports teams, your favorite entertainment outlet, whatever it may be. And you never root for somebody to lose their job. Matt Eberflus had to get fired. You were rooting for Ben Johnson to get hired. There's optimism. There's hope with this hire. But because of that, people lose their jobs, like some of these names we're going to get to, and it's a bummer. And you just hope that they are given an opportunity somewhere else to, again, continue on with their career and hopefully at this very moment, at the very least, you can see that somebody like a Thomas Brown who won't be brought back, or an Eric Washington who won't be brought back, are just a few names. And I'm going to bring it up from actually Adam Johns, who was at the press conference, one of the awesome names in the Chicago beat. He tweeted out interim head coach Thomas Brown, interim OC and wide receivers coach Chris Beatty, the offensive line coach Chris Morgan, QB coach Kerry Joseph, and defensive coordinator Eric Washington will not be retained by the Bears. And we've already seen that Rizzy will not be coming in to do the special teams. So it really is just rumored to be Dennis Allen so far. And I think Fairley has also been taken off the board to be the new OC. So there is going to be some new names. It is going to be a brand new offense, defense, except for the special teams. And I want to make sure I get this right. So let's make sure Let's make sure here. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that this is this is from Bears Wire, and this comes from Alyssa Barbieri. It is Bears expected to retain Richard Hightower as special teams coordinator. With Ben Johnson officially being introduced as Chicago Bears' new head coach, the focus shifts to building his coaching staff. There's been plenty of reports and rumors about potential assistants who could join Johnson's staff, including Dennis Allen as defensive coordinator and Darren Rizzi as special teams coordinator. But a latest report indicates Chicago could be retaining one key coordinator. According to Denver Broncos reporter Mike Kliss, the Bears aren't expected to land Rizzi as their special teams coordinator. Chicago is one of several teams, including Denver, interested in a New Orleans Saints interim head coach. Instead, Chicago is expected to retain Richard Hightower, who served as the team's special teams coordinator for the past 3 years in his role. So what do I take from that? The first thing is, I think Ben Johnson comes in here when it comes to building his staff with an open mind. I think the Dennis Allen thing is something a lot of us have been kind of really keen in on. Just because somebody like that is not a threat to be the new head coach, he's not going to get vultured out of here for some other team to be the third-time head coach. But he's somebody who's seen a lot. He is somebody you can lean on to take care of the defense, but to also be your mentor and to kind of help you along the way as your first-time head coach in a big-time city like Chicago. So I think that in the first instance is really interesting that Ben Johnson, that is, has been open and been flexible to obviously want to build his own staff, but also being open to some of the players that were here on the coaching staff before he got here. So, and this is big picture for Ben Johnson. This is just one piece of it that I've noticed over the last few days, listening to him as he's gone through all the different media cycles, as you've seen him in press conferences in Detroit, the way you hear his former players like Amon-Ra St. Brown talk about him, that this is somebody who is confident in his own self-worth and ability, but also humble enough to listen to others' opinions and to utilize other people's talents to try to merge them with his own and his ideas and his philosophy. And there's a lot of sound that I think really highlights that. And I want to get to that in just a second. So why don't we do this? Why don't we take a look at some of the media tour that he has done over the last few days. So first thing we're going to do is, why don't we stay, before we go to what he did at PFT with Mike Florio and Chris Sims, let's listen into a few more things from the press conference from a few days ago as he was introduced as the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. And this is something that really caught my attention when it was brought up. And that had to deal with what he thought about the way the Chicago Bears 2024 season went. So this is new head coach of the Chicago Bears, Ben Johnson, in his introductory press conference, talking about being surprised about the Chicago Bears 2024 season.
Hey, Ben, Mark Rohde with the Score here in Chicago. Welcome to the city. You mentioned that this roster is loaded with talent. So then when you look back at the Bears season, enduring a 10-game losing streak, does that surprise you that a team with this type of talent endured that? And how close do they not need to make that many changes going into this year?
Yeah, listen, we'll evaluate the whole roster. I have not watched all the tape, but I have a good feel from game planning against this defense and certainly seeing the crossover tape with the offense that I feel really confident about the current talent level already in the building. Going into this season, I felt like this place was a sleeping giant. To be honest with you, I personally was more concerned about the Chicago Bears than I was anybody else in this division. Now, there's a number of reasons why that did not unfold, all right, which that's why I'm here. I'll get to the bottom of that, and we'll see if we can't get that corrected and cleaned up. But I was very encouraged with what was already on the roster right here, and like I said before, this division, as hard as it is, really excited about competing here.
Hey, Ben, Mark Rohde with the Score here in Chicago. Welcome to.
So that right there when you hear him he didn't go right into detail of why he believed the team struggled. And obviously here in Chicago, we've talked about it. They weren't disciplined. The coaching staff wasn't competent enough. This team wasn't able to run a fast-paced offense. They weren't able to get plays in on time. They didn't know how to handle their timeouts or how to handle a challenge. There were so many different instances where it wasn't just talent. The Chicago Bears' talent on the field didn't always live up to their end of the bargain. But I think, unlike a lot of different seasons, you can really point out moments in which the coaching staff and their either lack of experience or just not being good enough at the job cost this team. The Bears against the Texans. We're going to go down their schedule for just a second. Bears and Texans. Bears end up losing 19-13. Remember how that game ended? The hecticness that was the final drive of the game with Caleb Williams not being able to get to the play out in time. The offensive line being everywhere. The following week, Bears lose 16-21 to the Colts. Then the Bears go out and get a win against the Rams. Then you have that win streak with the Rams, the Panthers, and the Jaguars. The Hail Mary against the Commanders. Having those two duds back-to-back against the Cardinals and the Patriots. Losing by 1 point, the block field goal to the Packers. Losing in overtime to the Vikings. Losing to the Lions, 23-20. You go down the list, you know how these games ended up. Those weren't just because Caleb Williams was holding on to the ball too long or the offensive line wasn't good enough. That had to do with, in the big moments, when your coaching staff in game is supposed to help you win within the margins, to put your players in the best position, to put the team in the best spot to win a game. Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron constantly got in the way of their own players. And it cost them win after win after win, and eventually their jobs. So when you hear Ben Johnson coming in and telling you that he was surprised that the record was what it is, a lot of us were. We were frustrated because it didn't make sense. And it felt so sloppy because it was. So when you hear him say, yeah, we're going to tighten things up, it makes you wonder what was going on behind the scenes that we haven't heard yet about just how dysfunctional it was in that locker room. So that was one thing that he said that really caught my attention in the introduction press conferences, what he thought of the Bears' record and why it was such a surprising outcome that they struggle as much as they did. So there's one more piece of audio that I want to listen to, and that's let me pull it up for you guys right now. Make sure that we have it. Is how involved he will be on defense.
Josh Bell, called to Clocker Sports. With all that you have on your plate offensively, how involved do you plan to be defensively, and do you foresee any sort of scheme change going forward?
Yeah, I think you have to, when you're the head coach, you have to be involved defensively. You have to be involved in special teams. That comes with the territory. And so when you talk about last year, why I went back to Detroit, part of the reason was I had not fully comprehended how to make that all work. I'm at a much better space right now in terms of time management, how I can be involved with all three phases. The whole key to this is being able to tie them together, play complementary football. And so I will be heavily involved both defensively and special teams as much as offense. It's going to be critical that I hire people that have some experience here in this league and I can lean on and I can trust. Defensively, there are a number of guys I want to talk to, and really it'll be predicated on who we decide to go with, what that defense is going to look like.
It seems like George McCaskey was a little bit more hands-off in this hiring process. It seemed like Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles really found the man that they wanted, had the collateral in a financial way to bring him in and make sure he never left Chicago. This was something that we have never seen the Bears do before. Kevin Warren is not within the family. Ryan Poles is not within the family. Ben Johnson is not within the family. There is no Trace Armstrong to be seen within this hire. This is a new way that the Chicago Bears have handled business. And it has put them in a position where they paid $13 million for a first-time head coach. Now, within that statement, a first-time head coach is something the Chicago Bears do a lot of. The difference is we have seen Ben Johnson over the last 3 years elevate the talent on the Detroit Lions to bring them to a point where they were averaging over 30 points a game this season, where Dan Campbell trusted Ben Johnson to take care of his biggest asset that he had on that team, that they believed they were going to win a Super Bowl. That is how much Dan Campbell trusted Ben Johnson. It's a big difference from what we've heard about Matt Nagy, where we weren't sure how much Andy Reid was letting him call plays, that Tennessee Titans debacle in the playoffs. And then obviously seeing how he handled Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. And then these years later, Matt Eberflus, who was going to get fired before getting a head coaching job. It's different. Will it work out? There's no guarantee. More than likely it won't. It's the NFL. It's hard. And most people fail. But if you look at Bears history and normally how the McCaskies handled this, not once did you hear Ben Johnson pander to you as a Bears fan about the Green Bay Packers or Virginia McCaskey or George Halas. It was about the players. It was about the organization being there for player development. It was about wins. It was about football. And it seemed like it was a genuine person in front of the microphones and one of the toughest beats in all of sports and came off with the W. Now, you could win press conferences. You could lose press conferences. It means nothing in September when the games happen. But as long as this trend of the Bears doing things that they normally don't, which is getting in their own way, and Ryan Poles is humble enough after the years he's had of reaching for players in coveted draft position or over-evaluating or overvaluing Nate Davis type of players, that he listens to his head coach, that they spent a lot of money in, that the new boss of football operations was here to make sure he got hired, that he listens to him. And he says, I want this offensive lineman. I want this swing tackle. I need this tight end. Ryan Poles is humble enough, smart enough to look at his head coach and say, all right, let's do it. This is all about the development of Caleb Williams and the success of the Chicago Bears. And over the last few days, the Bears have finally gotten some goodwill, not only in Chicago, but around the entire NFL, strictly at how Ben Johnson has handled the spotlight being put on him. And speaking of spotlight being put on him, thank you all for joining us here on the Sports Cubicle and Sports from the Couch. I'm your host, Mike Mercado. Make sure you guys are subscribing to us. Subscribe to us right here on the YouTube channel at the Sports Cubicle. If you want even more Bears content, check us out over at Bear Era Podcast on YouTube at Bear Era Pod. It's myself, Mike Mercado, EJ Snyder from Bootleg Football, and Kieran Hall from the Irish Bears Show, the Irish Bears Network. We have some of the best guests nationally. We're talking about the heavy hitters and some amazing Bears conversation over at Bear Era. Check us out on YouTube at Bear Era Pod or at the Blue Wire Podcast Network. And in the national spotlight, Ben Johnson went on the PFT podcast with Mike Florio and Chris Sims. It's a great podcast. I get a kick out of it. And he's doing the rounds. We've seen him on Collinsworth, and we've seen him with Danny Parkins over on FS1. And I want to hit on this because we can move forward now from what he said on the introductory press conference. He's had some time now. The rumor mill has started. You've heard some of the names that might be part of his coaching staff. Now people get a chance to really think what they want to ask him. And why the Bears? Why not Jacksonville? Why anything? Why not last year? So let's go to this one first. Ben Johnson on culture building. Because we just spent a few minutes talking about the lack of responsibility, accountability, creativity, forethought, thinking, and wherewithal, communication, and lack thereof that was the Matt Nagy and more recently the Matt Eberflus era. Listen to what Ben Johnson has to say about culture building.
You brought up Coach Campbell, right? And the culture he created there, it seems like it's pretty damn special in Detroit, right? What's one thing that you'll kind of take from Dan and what he did, or something that really impressed you about him watching him be the head coach?
Listen, there's so many things that he does well. I've got so much respect and admiration for him. I really can't speak highly enough for the person that he is and the mentor that he's been to me. There's a million things that I've learned from my time there in Detroit with him. But I said yesterday in the press conference, and I'll say it again, is just that ability to delegate, hire people you trust, and allow them to do their jobs and be themselves. Early on when I was a coordinator, I felt like I probably micromanaged a little bit too much. And so that's been a good lesson in development for me over the last 3 years, is to, hey, let these assistant coaches, they're good coaches, let them do their jobs. And I've learned and I've grown from that. And hopefully we can pick up where that left off there in Detroit, here in Chicago.
The biggest mistake most coaches that try to mimic Bill Belichick do is the very superficial Bill Belichick character in press conferences or talking to the media or when practice is available for the public. But what Bill Belichick was brilliant at was looking at his roster and adapting not only himself, the playbook, but the entire coaching staff to say, this is what our team does great. This is what our team does pretty good. And this is what our team is bad at. How do we make sure we accentuate what we're great at and we nullify all the bad and it never creeps up on us? That is how they won a bunch of Super Bowls. All the silliness of him jumping on a press conference, that was just to take all the distraction away from his players and all the craziness that was happening in that locker room. But when I hear Ben Johnson speaking right there, I hear a person that is willing to legitimize the word collaborative at Hallis Hall, because it's a word they used a lot during the last regime, but I don't think they knew exactly what it meant, just like accountability. But when you hear him speak, it's just a normal football coach, not trying to be too cute, not trying to pull the wool over your face. He's there to tell you what the mission statement is. And that is culture building. It's keeping people accountable by the responsibilities they're given and the punishment when they don't come up and adhere to them. When they have bad plays and they continue to make those mistakes after you've explained it to them, shown it to them, taught it to them. This is why when he's, again, just telling you these things, an experienced coaching staff around him, having the legitimacy of being the guy that called one of the best offenses in the last few years in this decade of the NFL and the Detroit Lions, helping legitimize the Detroit Lions, having all the trust in the world from Dan Campbell. That's building culture. Firing your coach mid-season because you were sick and tired and showed it was unacceptable, the results that were given to you. Making sure you got your man in the coaching carousel that was going crazy after interviewing 16,000 people. The minute it came down to you could get your man, you got him. That's culture building. Not just talking about it, being about it. And for Ryan Poles, that's listening to his coach, and that's getting him the players he needs. And for Ben Johnson, it's getting the best out of Caleb Williams. The most important thing now, after the hire, is not just what this front office is going to do the next few months scouting, but then come draft day. And then free agency, who they bring in, how they build this roster. And then it all leads to one thing, Caleb Williams and his development. And the appreciation I have for Ben Johnson and his openness to say, it's about Caleb, is a breath of fresh air, my friends. Because that is what it's about. So why don't we listen to Ben Johnson talking about the playbook and Caleb Williams with Chris Sims and Mike Florio on the PFT show.
Coach, you said yesterday that the plan isn't to drop a playbook onto the offense you currently have led by Caleb Williams. You're going to rip it down to the studs and build it back up. Tell us what that actually entails. Is it as simple as sitting down and drawing up new play, all driven by here's my quarterback and here's the rest of my offense?
So I had the benefit when I was a first-time offensive coordinator and not having a playbook, but yet being around a lot of different coordinators in my past, bringing a lot of different ideas together and making that Detroit playbook. And I did it, though, with the help of Jared Goff. And it was perfect because we were able to sit in a dark room together for 3 days and talk about what he loved from LA and what I've loved in my past. And we were able to shape that together. And it really, in my opinion, became a beautiful thing. The easy thing to do would just be plop that same playbook down and start there and say, Caleb, you got to learn all this. I've been through that before. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to do it, particularly with a young quarterback. I want to know exactly what concepts he loves to start with, and then we can build it out from there. So listen, I plan on spending a lot of time with him. I want him to feel empowered in this offense, but he's got to earn that as well, which he understands. We've already had those conversations. So it's one of those things. We just got to spend some time together. And like I said, I really believe this is a quarterback-driven league, and he's going to take us as far as we can possibly go here.
How about that? How about a coach saying, yeah, I'm going to talk to my quarterback and see what he likes. I'm not just going to be stubborn and make you learn my offense because I know my offense is going to work. My offense will always work as long as you execute it. You listen to Ben Johnson, and it's this reassurance that it's not the same coach over and over again that we've seen in Chicago. It's not Matt Nagy. It's not Matt Eberflus. They're not talking to you like you're dumb. They're talking to you like you're an adult, that you can understand the concept that the most important player in any level of football is the quarterback. And it doesn't work. You could have the cutest plays in the world. None of it matters if your quarterback isn't good. And you don't get to do the cute stuff, like all the trickery plays, if your quarterback hasn't earned it. And that's what you're hearing from Ben Johnson. It's not just, oh, I get Caleb Williams and he's great and he's automatically going to be great. He's telling you, I'm going to listen to Caleb. I'm going to talk to Caleb. We're going to develop and we're going to create an offense that is going to help flourish his talents. But if Caleb doesn't hold his end of the bargain, we don't get to do the fun stuff. We don't get to be creative. And we also know that Ben Johnson is going to ask for everything it's going to take to help a Caleb Williams, which is the offensive line and even more running back depth and even more tight end depth. So these are the moments now for the Chicago Bears that matter the most, is roster construction and player development. And that's everywhere in the NFL. But don't forget the turnaround that can happen in this sport. And if the coach can get the best out of his players, and if this front office has made some kind of a turn and win within the margins when it comes to signing free agents and scouting players and drafting the right talent, the Bears are set up for a nice future. The NFC North was absolutely dominant this year in the regular season. We know it won't be like that next year. And there's a lot of questions going into 2025 for not only the Minnesota Vikings, not only the Green Bay Packers, but the Detroit Lions. Don't have Aaron Glenn as the defensive coordinator. Don't have Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. And every year is different for every team. So there's a lot of optimism to be had. And I think a lot of it comes from listening to Caleb Williams and how DJ Moore and Roman Dunze and Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles talk about Ben Johnson. And then if you don't believe that, listen to him for yourself and tell me at the very least they're not gaining some form of goodwill this offseason. Doesn't guarantee, though, that it's going to equal wins, but it's a good place to start. Thank you all so much for joining us on this live edition of the Sports Cubicle Sports from the Couch, as we kind of just talked about the last few sound bites from the introductory press conference and some of the national media cycle that the new coach of the Chicago Bears, Ben Johnson, has gone on. But obviously, we're going to be talking about this over the next few weeks. I mean, we have the Super Bowl coming up, which means scouting time is here, which means draft season is here. And by the time you know it, it'll be rookie mini camp and training camp. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But we'll be right here if any news breaks, if any official coaching staff has been hired, the new DC, the new OC. So stick right here for that. Make sure you guys are subscribing to us right here on the YouTube channel at the Sports Cubicle. We're on Sunday nights here on Chicago Radio on WCPT 820 AM and WSBC 1240 AM at 9 p.m. The Sports Cubicle. And of course, you want more Bears content? Go to Bear Era Podcast. It's EJ Snyder from Bootleg Football, Kieran Hall from the Irish Bears Network, the Irish Bears Show, and myself. We have the best guests from the national level when it comes to the NFL. Check us out over on YouTube at Bear Era Pod or at the Blue Wire Podcast Network at Bear Era. Please take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We will be back in a few days if Ben Johnson hires anybody to his coaching staff. But you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Mike Mercado.